Trump slams NATO as horrible, while the rift deepens over Europe's refusal to back his Iran war push. He threatens a NATO reset as European allies reject the Iran war drive and choose restraint over escalation. After Germany, Trump now eyes pulling U.S. troops from other NATO nations, escalating pressure on the alliance. Trump's NATO tantrum grows worse after Merz's humiliating remark, turning a policy dispute into a public transatlantic clash. Donald Trump has threatened to redraw the U.S. military footprint in Europe amid growing tensions over the campaign against Iran in the Middle East, using the dispute to pressure traditional allies. After publicly threatening to reduce U.S. forces in Germany, Trump also warned he is considering pulling additional troops from Italy and Spain, extending the leverage beyond a single country. Trump cited what he described as NATO's lack of sufficient political and military support for Washington's campaign in the Middle East, arguing that European members have not matched American commitment. He said the Pentagon is currently reviewing troop levels in Germany, with a formal decision on any drawdown expected in the coming days, adding to uncertainty within the alliance. When pressed on Italy and Spain, Trump suggested that reductions in those countries are likely, framing the question as a matter of cost-sharing and burden distribution rather than pure strategy. The remarks came amid a sharp public disagreement between Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who has challenged Washington's conduct of the war. Earlier, Merz accused the United States of being humiliated by Iran and lacking a clear, coherent strategy in the Middle East, which drew an immediate and confrontational response from a U.S. president. His criticism triggered a direct public rebuke from Trump, escalating tensions between the two key NATO partners at a time when European unity is already being tested by the Iran conflict. Berlin currently hosts more than 36,000 U.S. military personnel, making any substantial reduction a major blow to NATO's collective defense posture and transatlantic force projection. By comparison, Italy hosts around 12,600 U.S. troops, while Spain has roughly 3,800, so even smaller drawdowns would still alter the alliance's operational flexibility. The dispute highlights how parts of Europe are resisting being drawn more deeply into the Iran conflict and instead are pushing for diplomatic resolution rather than a military one. Germany has recently announced plans to send a minesweeper to the region to support efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, signaling a limited but cautious contribution. Despite this gesture, Trump has continued to press allies to do more, repeatedly warning that NATO risks remaining a paper tiger if members do not step up their commitments to shared security.
You talked about possibly pulling out some troops out of Germany. Would you be considering the same thing for Spain and Italy? I mean, they haven't been exactly on board.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I probably will. Why should I? Look, why shouldn't I? Italy has not been of any help to us, and Spain has been horrible, absolutely horrible. It's NATO. It's not even the fact that they're bad. It's one thing if they said nicely, or if they said, okay, we'll help, but the help's a little slow. But the level, and we helped them with Ukraine. They made a mess out of Ukraine, a total mess. And we helped them with Ukraine. Ukraine has nothing to do, we're an ocean apart. It has to do with them. It's like for them, it's their front door. We helped them. And Biden gave them $350 billion, which was insane. It's one of the reasons the war went on. But when we needed them, they were not there. We have to remember that. And so if we ever have a big one, because we didn't need any help with Iran. We had Iran right from the first day it was over. It was over. And now it's even more so. We're so locked and loaded if we want to do. But we didn't need the help. And to a certain extent, I asked them, I didn't need the help, but I said, yeah, we'd love to have you help, because I wanted to see if they do it. And they, in all cases, they said, we don't want to get involved. And the amazing thing is they use the Strait of Hormuz. We don't. We don't use it. We don't need it. We have a lot of oil. Well, wait a minute. And they use it, we don't. And you would have thought they would have said, we would love to help you. But they didn't, which I think was a verse. And Germany, he's doing a terrible job. He's got immigration problems. He's got energy problems. He's got problems of all kinds. And he's got a big problem with Ukraine because they're in that mess. And he criticized me for doing the whole thing with Iran. But I said, would you like to have a nuclear weapon in the hands of Iran? He said, no, I don't. I said, well, then I guess I'm right. He didn't have any answer to that. The bottom line is for this world, for our country, but certainly for Israel, the Middle East, and Europe, much closer, you cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. And if you agree that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, which most people agree, almost everybody, it should have been done a long time ago. But if you agree they can't have a nuclear weapon, then what I did has been executed perfectly because our military has decimated them.
Donald Trump has now threatened to yank US troops from Germany entirely, as his Iran war feud with Chancellor Merz spills from social media into NATO politics. On April 29th, he announced that the US is studying and reviewing a possible troop reduction in Germany, framing it as a live option rather than a distant threat. In a Truth Social post, Trump said a decision on cutting forces could come in the near term, a phrase that rattled officials in Berlin and Brussels alike. The threat comes directly amid a public spat with Merz over the Iran war, after the German leader blasted Washington's tactics in front of students and reporters. Reports claim Trump is furious that Berlin has refused to openly back the full US-Israeli campaign or send combat forces to help forcibly reopen Hormuz. Given the sheer size of America's presence, any significant drawdown would be a geopolitical thunderclap for NATO, signaling a deeper rift than just an argument over Iran. On April 27th, Merz told students that the Americans clearly have no strategy for the Iran conflict, accusing Washington of blundering into a war without an exit plan. He went further, saying an entire nation is being humiliated by Iranian negotiators, who he described as skillfully dragging the US to Islamabad and back with nothing to show.
The Americans clearly have no strategy, and the problem with conflicts like this is always that you don't just have to go in, you also have to get out again. We saw that all too painfully in Afghanistan for 20 years. We saw it in Iraq. So this whole affair is, as I said, ill-considered, to say the least. At the moment, I cannot see what strategic exit the Americans are now opting for, especially as the Iranians are obviously negotiating very skillfully, or rather, very skillfully not negotiating and letting the Americans travel to Islamabad only to leave again without any results. An entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian state leadership, especially by these so-called revolutionary guards. We offered, as Europeans, and said that we were willing, after the end of negotiations, to help getting the Strait of Hormuz open again. We offered to send in minesweeper boats from Germany to help free the passage from mines, as it has clearly been, at least partially, mined. We can help there, but first the fighting needs to end. And at the moment, I do not see how this can be realized in the near future, because the Iranians are clearly stronger than one thought, and the Americans clearly don't seem to have a convincing negotiating strategy. I am sorry to have to say it, but at the moment it is a pretty tricky situation. And it is costing us a lot of money. It is costing us a lot of tax money and taxing our economy. This conflict, this war against Iran is having a direct negative effect on our economy and needs to be ended as soon as possible.
The next day, Trump shot back online, claiming that Merz thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and blasting the chancellor as dangerously naive. He added that Merz doesn't know what he's talking about, using the same post to attack Germany's economy and defense record as evidence Berlin should not lecture Washington. Interestingly, by April 30th Merz was striking a more conciliatory tone, stressing Germany's readiness to help clear mines in Hormuz and backing harder sanctions.
And in this spirit, we are also committed to bringing an end to Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz as a matter of urgency. If the necessary conditions are met, Germany stands ready to take military action to ensure the freedom of navigation. Ahead of last week's European Council meeting in Cyprus, I call for the pressure of sanctions on Tehran to be stepped up once again. For if Hormuz remains blocked, this will cause massive economic damage for us all. Our message is therefore that Iran must come to the negotiating table. It must stop playing for time. It must no longer hold the entire region, and ultimately the whole world, hostage. Iran's military nuclear program must be brought to an end. There must be no further attacks against Israel and our partners in the region. On all these issues, we are in close contact with our partners, including, and particularly, those in Washington. We do this in the shared transatlantic interest. We do so with mutual respect and a fair sharing of the burden. And in doing so, We are following a clear course, particularly during this turbulent period. This course remains firmly focused on a strong NATO and a reliable transatlantic partnership.